My name is Gareth Aden, and I'm here for the Nashville Bar Association and its Historical Committee. And it's my real pleasure today to be interviewing Steve Cox, who has probably tried more lawsuits before a jury than anybody else in my generation, and then had the gumption to make a second career that's been successful also. Steve, if you would, let's start out just like a deposition would. Give me your full name, please, sir.
All right. Stephen E. Cox, C-O-X.
And what is your birth date and where were you born?
October 26, 1943, St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah.
I'm going to pause right there. Can you sit up a little? There you go. I know it's hard, but go ahead.
Steve, tell us about your parents, who they were, and sort of what they did.
Well, my mom, I guess, was a mom all her life. My dad ran a hardware and furniture store, combination of the two, in a little town called Marion, Illinois, which is in southern Illinois. That's to get to the big town. To have me, we had to drive up to St. Louis, apparently. But long and short of it was, that's what he did, and then they got divorced. My mom remarried subsequently to a guy from Maryville, Tennessee. Interesting story there. He was a Gamble, G-A-M-B-L-E, and they were one of the first settlers in in that valley up there. And they had a place that they called it Fort Gamble. That's how far back that he went, his family. Matter of fact, I think Maryville High School is built on part of that original Gamble property.
Steve, what was your father's full name?
Eugene.
And
we certainly didn't want to call him that.
How about your mother? What was her maiden name, please, sir?
Her maiden name was Martin, and she was originally from Canada, and moved to southern Illinois with her dad and family.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up and sort of where you went to school.
Marion, Illinois, up through 43 through 57. My mother remarried and we moved to Des Moines, Iowa. A lot of people really don't think there is an Iowa, but there is. Graduated from Roosevelt High School in Des Moines, Iowa in 1961. Went back to Southern Illinois University as a freshman in the summer of 1961. 3 years later at Southern, I was maybe a second quarter sophomore. Eventually flunked out of there in winter quarter of 1964. Went down to my local draft board in Marion, Illinois, and said, "Take me." And they did.
You know, in 1964, you and I shared generations, so I know what was going on in 1964.
And that just goes to show you how dumb I was, Gareth, because when I said take me to my draft board, I didn't fully appreciate what was going on.
Yeah.
I found out.
You served in Vietnam.
Served in Vietnam.
And
just served, wasn't out there in the boonies. Never want to say anything like that, thank God.
Yeah, yeah. What was your job in the Army?
Back in 1965, when I went over there, was when they were having the first major buildup of troops. The Marines had gone in there earlier in 65, maybe as late as 64, I'm not for sure. But when I was sent over there, the 1st Infantry Division, which was the first full division, combat division that went over there, they were loading up on one boat in Oakland down the wharf, and I was loading up on another with my outfit. So whole units were going, not just individuals, but units. They were going by boat mostly rather than plane, because that was the first big buildup, summer of 65. And then when they got over there, you take a company. I was with an ordnance company, and they were putting them into this tent camp. And they would keep you there for 3 or 4 days, process you, tell you all the things about how you were getting blown up and how the booby traps and everything like that. And then they would send you to a permanent place, which was going to be your permanent location where you were going to set up and do business. And they put us in this tent camp, and it was called Tent Camp Bravo, right on the outskirts of Tonsanute Air Force Base, right on the outskirts of Saigon.
Well, anybody from our generation remembers Tonsanute Air Force Base because it was on the news every night.
And believe you me, it was active. So that's where this tent camp was. And because they didn't have anybody to run the tent camp, they took my captain, 2 of the NCOs, and 2 enlisted men, which I was one of them, and let us be what you call the cadre to run this tent camp. And I never left. Everybody else left, but I never left that tent camp. And I was in charge of quarters in a tent camp from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 7 o'clock the next morning. And this tent camp at one point in time housed 3,000 people.
I was going to ask you how many when you left Vietnam.
15 to 2 grand. It was up to about 3,000 at one time. And I coordinated everything from 5 till 7.
When did you come home, Steve?
March 1966.
All right. Let's take it up there. You have you've not graduated yet from college. You've had I'm sure, a fascinating experience in Vietnam. What happened?
My mom was absolutely petrified that I was going to go back to Southern Illinois and fall into my habits. My stepdad was a graduate of UT. When I was over in Vietnam, he wrote me a letter and said, if I could get you in UT, would you go? I said, sure, why not? You know, anything to get him off my back. And the next thing I know, he went over there, got my transcripts, went over there to UT and said, would you let my boy in? And UT said, we've had good success with veterans. Sure, we'll put him in on probation. So they put me in, let me in on probation the summer of 1966 at UT.
And what course of study did you follow there?
Doing marketing,
Okay.
made the dean's list, and first time out was off and running.
Personal question, did the experience in the service sort of grow you up?
You know, I want to say yes, but in truth, Garrett, I really want to give the service a lot more credit maybe than what it deserves. But really, when you're between 18, 21, 22, those years in there, a lot of things can change during that period of time, regardless of where you were. So I think it was just part of the natural growth, and you know, after the Army, I didn't want to consider going back in, at least unless I was an officer, I'll tell you that. So I don't know, I think it was a good thing for me. I know it turned out to be a good thing for my son, but whether or not that was the make or break, but I'll give it credit for it. I loved it.
When did you get your undergraduate degree at UT?
Never got one.
Tell me about that.
Don't have one to this day.
What happened?
At that time at UT, after your junior year, you could transfer into law school and then take your first freshman is a law student equaled your senior year in your undergraduate. And so I switched, I got in, and started in law school in March of 1968.
And how did you like
it?
it?
Quarter system.
Yeah.
Well, I finished up my first year, and they said, well, we can give you your undergraduate degree, but you haven't finished your basic requirements to get a BA degree. I said, well, what have I got to take? And they said, 2 quarters of statistics. I said, yeah, right. So I am a lawyer now without a undergraduate degree. I guess I could go back and take 3/4 of statistics to this day.
That's a great story.
Not going to do it.
Yeah. What was it that drew you to law school?
Nothing. My mom, who's, you're going to start getting the impression, was pretty big in my life, decided that no one in our family had ever been a professional. So again, she sent my stepdad over there and said, your mother wants you to try to get into law school and take this test. And I said, because she was help footing the bill, I said, well, I'll take it. But so, you know, get her off my back, so to speak.
Right.
And I took it. And Garrett, I think I made 2 points high enough to be accepted into law school. By this time, I had got my average up, making the dean's list every single quarter in undergraduate. Since I came back in '66, I think my grade point average overall had gotten just right, maybe a percentage point above a 2.0. That's how far behind I was.
You started behind the eight ball.
Oh, man. So in any event, they let me into law school. I mean, you know, I wouldn't have a chance today, you know. But anyway, they let me into law school. And again, I said, well, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to give it my best shot. And if I flunk out, which I'm sure I will, then that'll again take my mother off my back. And so I go over there in the first quarter and I take the normal contract, property, whatever, legal bib and stuff like that. And I made an A in contracts and C's in all the others. And I had the highest grade point average in my class. So that didn't work out. And the next thing I know, man, I'm a lawyer. And I can't even spell it.
Looking back,
2.5 years later.
Looking back at your law school career, and I like to do this myself, did you change much in law school? What's your take on the law school scene as you went through it?
I'm going to tell you something. I thought then, and I thought now, that law school could be reduced to about 1.5 years, maybe 2. And I think there's been something that's recently in the paper about that being suggested, by the way. I thought the worst course I ever took was legal bib. Then, I think it's probably the most important course that I could have taken over there, and I didn't do well, and I've never been good at research as a result of it. I think once you learn the vocabulary and the concept of what you're doing, that's about all you need. Is the vocabulary and the how to study and the how to research and the how to pinpoint what the issue is. And I think 3 years is unnecessary. And I'd say, and I think you probably agree with me, OJT has a lot to do with being a lawyer.
Tell me this before we leave law school. Were there any professors or students that made a big impact on you during law school?
No, to be honest with you, no. It was an interesting class, Gareth. Again, it was on the quarter system. My class was made up of 56 freshmen. 2 of the freshmen that started the same time I did were the Mondelli twins, who you know, lawyers here in town. Michael being a general sessions judge now. They started the same time I did. They said, look to the left, look to the right, they're going to be gone. It's true. I think there were 17 that actually graduated out of that 56.
My Lord.
Yeah, well, see, it was easy to get in, but, you know, they cut you. It was real cutthroat. I saw what I thought was some pretty doggone lawyers go by the wayside on me. So from that standpoint, I don't think anything really terribly stood out to me as related to an individual. Of course, I ended up making my living in insurance law, insurance defense work. I'm sure you'll get into that. The only D I ever made in law school was in insurance law. So, you know, there you are.
So we're now at about the spring, I guess, of 1970, and young Steve Cox has graduated from law school. And where did you go?
Stuck around and got a job working construction up until the bar.
Yeah.
Stayed in Knoxville. I was married at the time. Got married, matter of fact, just before I started law school. Worked construction, took Crosley's course. People today don't remember him, but he used to teach it himself. Crosley was great. Passed the bar. My mom was here in Nashville. My wife wanted to move to Nashville. She was an Army brat out of D.C. Moved to Nashville and started looking for a job. Got an apartment, brand new apartment, Georgetown, out on Hillsborough Road. They just opened up. One single bedroom. Went looking for a job.
How did it go looking for a job?
Couldn't find one. Closed shop. Vanderbilt, Harvard maybe, Stanford maybe, some dad's son. UT, guys that were graduating from the Y, what was the Y then, Nashville School, couldn't get a job.
Did you get an office?
Never got an offer. A.B. Neal, who later became Supreme Court clerk, and a guy named Henry Fouch had an office up in Life and Casualty Tower, 2 on each end and a storage space in the middle, secretary out front. A.B. offered me his storage space. So I rented a little sliver across the hall, some dead-end space. We moved the storage over there. I went and bought a used desk and 2 chairs and put them in his storage room in the Life and Casualty Star. And that was in the latter part. I couldn't find a job all that time, and this was in the latter part of 70. I think I went up there somewhere around October of 1970 into that storage space. Started practicing law with A.B.
What a story. I presume that there's a real place in your heart for A.B. Neal.
They had some type of contribution thing in the historical society, and I talk about in my heart, I contributed as much as could be contributed in his honor, and it's on the front page there, you know.
Yeah.
He was the guy. And even more so, Gareth, because he took me every place with him. And the biggest places that he took me is, at that point in time, there used to be a drugstore, coffee shop on Union Street, right where the alley comes out on Union Street. And every morning, and you may remember this.
Yes, I do.
At 10 o'clock, a bunch of guys would fall in there and have coffee up in the balcony. And one of the guys in that group was a guy named Jim Camp, who is dead now, but went on to practice in Sparta, but at that time he was here. And you had guys like Tommy Peoples, Ward DeWitt, you had Judge Higgins, you had the president of the bar at that time, Bill Woods, a guy named Tom Proctor, a guy named Vince Webby. All these names you're familiar with. Some of the other people won't remember them. They were all lawyers in their early 40s.
Yes, exactly.
And so and he took me there. He told me he was going to take me. Christmas came about. He said, "I'm going to take you to the Court Square building in their penthouse for a Christmas party they had." He took me up there. I was thinking I was going to a penthouse. We went up the top floor, nothing but cinder blocks.
But you had a good time.
Yeah, that was where I met John J. Hooker, original John J. Hooker, who you practiced with.
Absolutely.
He died, Gareth, he died, I think, he died that year, and I think it was right after Christmas or right before. It was after his Christmas party.
He died about a week later, probably because our Christmas party at the Keeble
It
firm,
was on 23rd.
right before Christmas, and
I met him at that party, drink in hand. He had his whiskey in his hand, and, well, young man, you could probably imitate him. You know, what do you want to be? Well, I'd like to be a trial lawyer. He said, well, that's good. I do the same thing. Yes, sir, Mr. Hooker. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'll give you some advice. What's that, Mr. Hooker? Always shoot straight with the jury, because if you don't shoot straight with them, they'll find you out. And I'll bet you I have told that story to I don't know how many juries.
Yeah.
And that was a staple of mine. And a lot of times in final arguments, I would say to the jury, they said this, you know, did they shoot straight with you? I used that. I told Harry Lester, Judge Harry Lester, that story once. Apparently Harry didn't like Mr. Hooker.
I think they had some shootouts.
They had some bad shootouts, apparently,
Yeah.
because he guffawed at that. He said, you know, shot straight, you know, but nevertheless. And then in any event, but I knew how great a guy he was because it was right after the Powell trial, if you'll recall. You know, the murder trial, it was so famous.
Oh, yes.
And so I knew who he was. I knew he was a lion of this bar association. He and Jack Norton Sr. were the Lions when I started.
Steve, the names you mentioned and the people you got to know when A.B. took you around are some of the finest people I remember from my early practice. Did that help you get started in practice?
It did, because what happened is I met this guy at Menier Herod. At that time, it was Menier, Crouch, White, and Herod. Started practicing law in Nashville in 1917. Today it's Menier Herod. Menier, Crouch, White, and Herod. Jim Camp worked for them. They were looking for an associate. They had one associate, Jim Duran, who's another contemporary of ours. They hired Louis Hollabaugh, interviewed me before Christmas in December, and because he knew my situation in the storage room, and he hired me, and I started working for them. But it was a direct result of A.B. Neal, see, and A.B. wasn't happy about me leaving. Got a storage room back though. But in any event, I'm back, and I start with Menier Herod, now Menier Herod, on I think the 3rd of January 1971. And 3 days later, another new associate came to Menier by the name of Howard Liebengood.
Wow.
Now you're saying wow, and nobody up there listening to this is going to know who Howard Liebengood is, but Howard went on to become the Sergeant of Arms of the United States Senate when Senator Baker was the top Republican when Reagan came in. And was also heavily involved in Watergate, as you'll recall.
Take a minute and tell us a little bit how the Menier firm operated when you began there, and what type of work you got and what you did.
That firm had a reputation in town as being a factory, number one. That was one of the decisions I had to make when I had to talk to people about whether I should take a job there. It was a factory because they had a reputation of bringing in young lawyers, working them to death, not making them partner, and sending them back out on the street. And I don't think, I'd have to get a pencil and we'd have to talk, but the guys that started out in that firm and went on, guys like Mac Glasgow started with that firm. Used to be Tribune Minnick, I think, started with that firm. Mac Robinson started with that firm. But they just cranked it.
Yeah.
But heck, I needed a job, and they offered me $600 a month, man. and one half of everything I brought in, which guess what that was?
Yeah.
Zero.
I understand.
And I went out and got that job at $600 a month and I bought a house and a new car. Shoot, I was rolling. This is 1971.
Was your practice primarily insurance defense?
Insurance defense work is what they did, representing insurance companies. That's what it was, and that's what I grew up in, and I'm still in it.
To give
One way of
to give our younger lawyers a perspective, back in those days, were we on an hourly fee?
We were an hourly fee. Even back in that time, there was no such thing as spreadsheets. There was no such thing as time sheets. You didn't keep time. We still did, in that firm, they still did adjusting for particular companies, one of which was United Services Automobile Association, USAA, Geico. They still did adjusting for some Geicos. They also did just adjusting for some trucking companies. And you just went out and adjusted. I know we handled every USAA car wreck file in the adjustment level long before it ever gotten sued, if it ever did. And I think we charged $17.50.
Per hour?
No, that's it.
That was it.
$17.50. Unreal. But what you did when you billed a file, you looked at when it was over with. They didn't have interim billing. And some guys would use the results. If they won, they'd kick what they thought their fee was. And then if they lost, they'd do otherwise. Some guys used to say, well, is it a 1 knuckle, or is it a 2 knuckle, or is it a 3 knuckle file, and bill accordingly. And I guess it was sometime in the late 70s, the insurance industry decided that they were getting ripped off or something, and so they introduced the concept of time slips.
Right.
The worst thing they ever did for them, but because they were making out like bandits. And that's when the insurance defense firms, you got to remember, Garrett, and this may be one of the more interesting things that I say if I say anything interesting. But when I went to work for Manier, in January of 1971, it was in the American Trust Building, which to this day sits on the corner of 3rd and what?
The alley?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Very close to it.
In that building were the firms of Bass, Berry & Sims, Waller Lansden,
The old carpenter firm?
the old Carpenter firm, the Hofstadter firm, which at that time had a young associate by the name of Kip Gaden. It's the only associate they had, now judge. You had the McGugan firm,
That's right.
and did I say Waller Lansden?
Yes.
And Bolt, I think, was in that firm there too.
I think you're right.
So
I believe that's right.
So there you are. I mean, you're talking about whatever their names have become today. Bass Berry, of course, is the same. But by that was 3, 4 of the biggest law firms, and most important, blue stocking, and they were all in that building. And the Manier and the White and the Bolt and the Bass and all those guys, the Berry, I mean, they all owned that building.
Did you begin right off the bat trying many lawsuits, or did that develop over time?
That was back in the day that young associates weren't even allowed to sign letters under their own name at first. The old boys were really protective of their business. And no, I think it took me 5 years before they turned me loose trying a lawsuit in circuit court by myself. And that was pretty normal back then, unless it was a case that was my own.
Right.
Now, any case that I handled while adjusting, if it got into a lawsuit, go over in sessions, and there were a lot of sessions cases being tried back then, as you'll recall.
Do you have any great first lawsuit or early lawsuit stories?
I don't know that I have a first. I have the first time that I actually got into court. And if I tell you this story, I can assure you that it's the first time I've ever told it sober. But I was with A.B. Neal. He took me over there, and they were calling the docket. All of a sudden, this old man with about 5 or 6 in his family came up to me and said, "That guy over there said you'd help me out." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "Well, I've been charged with assault." And he had bib overalls on. He was probably in his 70s, early 80s. And I said, "Assault?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I said, "Well, sure, I'll help. Well, what are you charged?" And I said, "Well, I'll charge you." I had no idea what to charge. And I said, $300. Well, he pulled a wad of bills out of his old bib overalls that had choked a horse. I should have said 2,000 and he'd have paid it. And so I got in there, and Garrett, I don't even know where to sit in General Sessions Court. So I'm sitting there, and the old man and his family's back there, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, well, I'll watch and see who sits where. The next thing I know, they call the case, and it's the old man's case, and it's the first one up. And I stand up, and I look for A.B. Neal, who's taking me over there, and he's gone, man. He's vanished. And so I go up to the court, and I said, "Court, please, I'm Steve Cox. I represent the defendant." Well, the guy that was the judge at that time was, and I'm having a mental blank, come on, he just died, the Supreme Court Justice. You know him as well as, black,
I can't think of it right now.
yeah, that's, I'll think of it. He just died about a year and a half
Oh,
ago.
Judge Birch.
Yeah,
A.A. Birch. Okay.
Yeah, double A.
Yes.
And he's up there on the bench, and he said, "Okay," he said, "sign the waiver." Man, I'm right out of law school. I ain't waiving nothing. And I says, "Well, now, Judge, about that waiver," he says, "Well, you want to hear it here? You want to hear it today?" "Well, yeah, I'm here today." "Well, then you're gonna have to sign the waiver." And man, I don't know what a waiver is. I don't know what I'm waiving. I don't know nothing. And I said, "Well, yeah, okay." And so I signed a waiver, and he calls this guy up. He said, "Call the plaintiff up on the stand." There's no prosecutor that I see standing over there. I don't know him from nothing. I call my old man. He comes up, and he sits next to me, and the prosecutor turns to this guy, and he says, "Well, your name's so-and-so?" "Yeah, so-and-so." He says, "Well, tell the judge what happened here." He said, "Well, I'm sitting on my front porch, and that son of a bitch, he came running up that goddamn, I'll tell you right now, Judge, that son of a bitch." And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, God, this can't be right, man. Something has got to be wrong. He can't talk that way. And Judge Birch goes, now, calm down, we can't have none of that. We can't have none of that, you understand?" "Well, yes, I understand. But that son of a bitch," and started cussing again, and I'm sitting there, and I want to cry. I think surely, God, I can object. My mind's racing 1,000 miles a minute. What do I do? What do I say? He can't do what's happening. And the next thing I know, I hear Judge Birch say, "Get him off the stand and bind that man over to the grand jury." What? Bind him over to the grand? No clue what he was talking about, Garrett. Absolutely in a state of shock. And I stumble out the courtroom, and the old man and his family are all around me like that. The old man pulling on one arm, saying, "What happened? What happened?" And I don't know. I don't know what the hell's happening. "Don't worry about it. Give me your phone number. This is good. We'll be okay." I got him away from him, ran up to the district attorney's office, and I knew one of the district attorneys up there. Bobby Schwartz was up there at that time.
Right, right.
And,
He was a
there one
classmate
guy,
of mine.
Another guy that went down to Florida. He left before they did. Anyway, I knew him. And I went up and I explained to him what happened. Well, he's on the floor damn near laughing at me. And he said, don't worry about it. We'll handle it. Well, you know, it went away. The grand jury, never, whatever. Yeah, my first experience of being a trial lawyer.
I'm
Find
glad
that man over to the grand jury.
I'm glad I asked you. I think every lawyer just about remembers the first time they go to court and the first thing that happened.
Okay. Did I screw it up?
Oh no, just it fell down.
Okay.
Steve, tell me how your practice developed during the 1970s. Obviously, you began about mid-decade trying cases. How did it go?
Went good. One of the reasons why I chose to go with Mary is because I knew it was a defense firm, and I needed something to get back on the horse that just threw me and bind it over to the grand jury. I mean, you know, I was so doggone afraid to walk in the courtroom after that. I was shell-shocked. So I decided that this firm would throw me back in there and, you know, that type of thing. And it did. And we started, it just picked up. The business picked up. We started trying lawsuits in sessions all over Middle Tennessee. That firm was really well respected.
Yeah.
In the outlying counties. So home cooking wasn't too much of a problem back then. I mean, it existed, but not as anywhere near as bad. And a lot of them wouldn't say, well, you're so-and-so Mary's young associate, or you're Mr. White's young associate, that type of thing. Well, I've known them, and you know. So I was well received, and just started trying lawsuits in general sessions. That's before there was intercompany arbitrations, and you had the defense lawyers teeing off over property damage subrogations and fighting like hell, and then appealing them up to circuit court and trying them over with Judge Ellion and Joe Lozier. And that's where I learned, in truth, to try lawsuits, because I tried them right. And back at that time, the general sessions were Birch, Gail Robinson Jr., the dad of the Gail Robinson now, and a guy named Boone. There's only three of them. And the only one that ever asked me for a brief or to cite law was Birch. And I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. But then you got up into Joe Lozier's court, and that's when I learned to practice law. Joe Lozier flat taught some young lawyers on their appeals. He would hear these, that was one of his deals. He'd take, Ollian took half and he took half of the general sessions appeals. And boy, he was rough.
Well, that was my impression. Tell us a little bit about Joe Lozier and your experience with him.
He's got a satirical, off-the-wall sense of humor, Gareth.
He can cut you to the quick.
But a lot of time, what you had to learn about him, and what I learned about him, is that he would, well, if the court please, I'd like to introduce. Well, the court doesn't please anything. What do you want to introduce? And you're a young lawyer, and you say the court please, and the next thing you know, you're getting chewed out. You know, you introduce it. If he objects to it, I'll rule on it. You don't, the court please. Being obsequious or trying to be nice to him just wasn't the way he handled it.
Yeah.
I tried a law. This is a good example of Joe. I tried a lawsuit one time, and it was a horrible death case. A guy was ran over by a tractor trailer hauling tons of steel. And God bless his heart, he exploded from here down below his leg. It came out here. And it was a horrible case. And Charlie, oh, for crying out loud, here I go again. The Duchess and Charlie Warfield. That's
Yes.
Charlie Warfield was trying it, along with who's now the judge down there. Did a lot of divorce work now, but he moved down to
Martin.
Franklin. Huh?
Judge Martin?
Judge Martin. Trying the lawsuit, and Charlie had an expert, and he got up to testify, put the guy on the stand, and says, I want to, read this guy's qualifications. I stood up, Gareth, and I said, the court, please, I'm going to stipulate to the qualifications of their expert. There's no need to read all that. He stipulated, Mr. Warfield, well, Judge, if it please the court, I want to read part of it. Well, Mr. Warfield, please the court, do whatever you want to do. Read it if that's what you want to do. He stipulated if you want to read it. That should have been a big signal to Charlie at his age. Charlie starts reading this thing, Garrett. He must read 10 to 12 pages. On and on and on. And I'm watching the jury, and they're looking, and they're getting bored, as you can imagine, and they're starting to slouch and lean back, on and on. And I'm sitting there, good God. He finally says, I think that's enough, Judge. And Gareth, I don't know what, I guess I just lost it for a moment. But I said, well, you forgot to tell him that he's a part-time bartender at Joe's Village Inn. Joe's Village Inn out here in Green Hills. It just came out of my mouth. And there was this dead silence in the courtroom. I mean, you can imagine. And Charlie's like this, and the jury's bug-eyed. And Joe Lozier says, well, guys got to make a living somehow.
And the courtroom erupted.
Erupted. Settle that lawsuit right after they finished their proof.
Oh, that's a great story.
But that's the kind of guy Joe was.
Yeah.
He,
He kept you on your toes,
Oh.
and you better learn Joe's way.
You better learn it.
Now, one other judge I want to ask you about, because not many people these days knew him, but that's Judge Ullian. Tell us a little bit about trying a case in Dutch Ullion's court.
Just as far as I'm concerned, older, a Southern gentleman type, nice, let you try your lawsuit, delightful guy. He used to try to help young lawyers, just the opposite. Joe would be all over him, how I'm a judge, I think the best example that Judge Ullian used to do was, for example, if you were trying a lawsuit and the other side had made a directed verdict against you at the end of your proof, and everybody had argued back and forth, and then the judge would look at the plaintiff's lawyer, young lawyer, and he'd say, well, Mr. Cox, I'm getting ready to rule. And I said, this is one time of mine, I said, well, Judge, I still think that I argued a little bit more, and the other side guy didn't say anything. And the judge says, well, I'm getting ready to rule, Mr. Cox. Well, I knew what he was trying to tell me, but this kind of tells you about Judge Ullian. When he told you he was getting ready to rule, that was telling you he was getting ready to rule against you. So if you wanted to real quick take a non-suit and start over, you'd say, well, Judge, I think I'm going to take a non-suit. Well, I said, no, Judge, I want you to go ahead and rule. So he ruled against me, dismissed my case, and before I got back to Church Street, he'd called Ed Herod. and told him about it and said, Ed, I tried to tell the young man I was getting ready to rule against him. And Ed Herod came into my office, senior partner, said, didn't you know he was trying to tell you that? And I said, Judge, I wanted out of that case. It didn't bother me at all. But that's the type of thing he would do. He was a delight. Good guy.
You know, you had the benefit, and so did I, of trying lawsuits against a lot of lawyers, and probably a lot of good lawyers. Any that stood out over the years, Steve, as opposing lawyers that you got to try cases with?
You know, Gareth, there isn't very many lawyers that I really thought were better in the courtroom than I was. Now, I know that's a shocker, and you're not supposed to say that, but I don't ever recall getting out-lawyered. Mm-hmm. And I tried them in the first of my career against some of the older ones, like your former partner, Mr. Harris.
Tyree Harris.
Tyree Harris. I tried him against him. Frank Gorell of Bass-Berry, Lieutenant Governor, you remember him? I tried him on the other side of him. Harry Lester, I tried really tough cases against. And I never tried very many. The better overall lawyers were defense lawyers. That's the way it was back then. I mean, the defense lawyers were the ones that were good trial lawyers because they was the ones trying the lawsuits. And you're not going to be a good trial lawyer unless you try lawsuits. And I'm not talking about one or two. I'm talking about trying a bunch of them. Yep. So there was a bunch of guys that I never went up against. I never went up against Tommy Peoples, as a guy that I thought an awful lot of, and I never went up against the Hookers or anybody, you know, way back then. I went up against the Normans, the Sons, Jack, and those guys. But no, I never felt like that there was another lawyer in the courtroom that I took a back seat to. Now, I do think, I give a credit that there's a bunch of good ones around. Gail Malone, I always was fond of. He and I battled each other a couple of times. I thought he was an excellent lawyer. I mean, you start naming names, and I can start telling you lawyers that I, probably had a lot of respect for. But as far as that guy, like say Jim Neal, who would be more famous nationally in our bar than Jim Neal?
Nobody.
I don't think so either. And who would have had such success than him? And yet I never tried a lawsuit against him. And yet, Tommy Peoples got the biggest judgment against him that ever been gotten at that time when he recovered from that wrestler up here against Columbia.
Columbia, yeah.
So, and certainly I was in awe of Jim Neal and Mr. Hooker and Tyree Harris, and to go up against those guys, I thought, hey, this is big time. But
got two questions, Steve, and I'm going to ask them this way. First question is this. After, I'm guessing, 100 or more jury trials, what are Steve Cox's 1, 2, or 3 rules of jury trial practice? What are the things that stand out as the most important things?
Well, I'm going to go back to a couple of things, and I don't know that I can put them 1, 2, 3. I sincerely think that being sincere in front of a jury, shooting straight, being honest, works better than anything else. Period. And it's amazing how simple that is, but it's also amazing that so many people haven't picked up on that yet. You are who you are, and if you want to cry, you better be crying sincerely.
Yeah. Be yourself.
Be yourself. That's from a trial lawyer standpoint. That's also the best advice I could give a party or a witness if they have to testify. Most important person in a injury type case, which I'm most familiar with, and who's asking for money is the plaintiff.
How likable.
Yeah. And I mean, you
and-
can take the same set of facts, and if they like the plaintiff and they think the plaintiff is sincere, when they say they got a whiplash injury, they'll do one thing for them. And if they don't like them, they'll do another, and the difference will be astonishing to you. The second thing, I think, if I was telling a young person, which I have done in some seminars, is I think the most important part of the jury trial is voir dire. I spent more time thinking about voir dire than I ever did about closing argument. I thought the second best part, if you did it correctly, was the opening statement. And I felt like that if you did those two things correctly, first of all, voir dire, you get to talk to the people. Secondly, you get to tell the people what's coming in opening statement. So that they're sitting there and the trial progresses, they remember, yeah, he said that was going to happen. Yeah, he said that guy testified that way. Yeah, he, shooting straight, being sincere. And to me, that's where the lawsuits, for the biggest part, won or lost, absent somebody goofing up. I think the biggest thing that hurt me about being a trial lawyer was when I finally realized that I wasn't as important in the courtroom than I thought I was.
Yeah.
I could screw them up real good, but I don't think I turned a day too many times.
Steve, looking back, any cases that really stand out that you're proud of or that were seminal in your career that you want to share with us?
I think there's a couple that stand out. One is with Gail Malone. I'll tell you about that. I think I tried the first case tried in Tennessee where a wife got to sue her husband when they removed inter-spousal immunity.
Right.
Tried that in Gallatin. They had TV cameras up there when the jury came back. That was in the 80s, I think. So I always kind of remember that one. I think I was the first. I can't tell you the name of the case, which I should be able to but that's just me, I don't remember. But the Supreme Court handed down an opinion where wives and children could seek loss of consortium for the wrongful death of the father and their spouse. That came down one morning when I was to argue a final death case that day. The case was tried. We were down to final argument. Tommy Brothers got that off the ticker tape or something at 10 o'clock and drew the first jury charge under that ruling by the Supreme Court. Gave me a continuance if I wanted it because we hadn't tried it on that.
Yeah.
I mean, the proof was in on it, I guess, But, and I thought that the trial had gone fairly well, and I said no, and we'll just go ahead and you draw your charge and do it, and he did. And the jury hung 11-1 in my favor. But that was, I remember that one because it was, there's Tommy Brothers trying to put together a charge first time out of the box. I always felt like in this shooting straight with hooker jury concept that if your client was liable, you ought to tell the jury and admit liability when you start to try your lawsuit. A lot of juries, to get around saying you can't do that. A lot of guys would say, and Ed Herod used to say, well, I think after all the proof's in, you're probably going to find against my client. Another way of saying it. I just come out and say you're going to find it on fault. I think I was probably one of the few that did that so openly. I did that in a case against Gail Malone. Gail asked the court to keep me and my client, since we had admitted liability, from saying or testifying or saying that we were sorry, that we'd caused the accident. And Kip Gaden ruled that I couldn't say it, nor could my client. And directed a verdict. But before this was a motion in limine that I couldn't say I was sorry if I admitted liability, and which I had done. At the end and during the final argument, Gail Malone, before the jury, giving his opening statement, stated, you know, they come in here a year after this lawsuit's filed, and they walk up in front of you a year later and they say, I'm sorry. Or they say, it's my fault, not I'm sorry. It's my fault, not I'm sorry. It's my fault. Why didn't they do that a year ago when they filed their answer? Instead of waiting until we come up here a year later, we've had to take all this, do all this work, then they come in here and say, well, it's our fault. You're sitting there looking at me thinking, hey, that's pretty effective. I get up and I say to the jury, let me tell you something. I don't know what you've learned out of your service on the jury, but I hope you learn one thing, and I hope you learn this. If you ever go out there and you make a mistake when you're driving and you cause a wreck and you get sued for $1 million and you go to your attorney and the first thing he says is he wants you to admit it's your fault, you get up out of that chair as fast as you can and you go find you another attorney. I won that lawsuit in the sense of the word that Gail didn't get quite what he wanted. He finally beat me on appeal over the I'm sorry or something, I don't know what. Anyway, he get a new trial and he finally accepted what I'd offered before.
You've never told me that story.
Yeah, that's the first one. And I learned later, because you know Bob Parker?
Yeah.
His wife was on that jury. And Bob called me and he said, you know what? When they got in there, somebody said, I'll tell you one thing, if anybody sues me for $1 million, I'm not going to admit anything. And all the jury started laughing and saying, boy, isn't that the truth? So there you go.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah. You thought of the right thing to say under pressure.
And that's being a trial lawyer.
Yeah,
You got to go loose so you can react.
Let's tie up some ends that are important. Tell us about the progression of one of Nashville's oldest law firms, the Menier firm, while you were there.
Started out in 1917 or 1914. Tell you real quick because I got a memorandum here. 1914. Menier, a guy named Will Menier. The Menier that was left when I went 1970 was his younger brother by about 25 years or something. I don't know quite how that came out. Don't remember. Primarily from day one an insurance defense firm. When I started with them, they had, I think, 5 lawyers, 1 associate, Jim Duran, so a total of 7. That's all they had. Mr. Menier wasn't practicing. Olin White still was. And then you had Vince Fuqua, who you may remember, most people wouldn't. Don Smith, who's still practicing here, and
Certainly.
Louis Hollaball.
Right.
And then myself, Howard Liebengood, and Jim Durant. That's 1970. It continued to grow and got up into the 80s. And I know this because I'm pretty sure that I was chairman of executive committee chairman or whatever, managing partner, whatever name you want to put it. Got up to about 49 lawyers. I don't think we ever hit 50. We may have. Had spread out and was doing bankruptcy, doing a lot of work representing contractors that came about by defending them under bonds when the bonds they default and somebody had to go into a job and performance bonds and finish the job and hire contractors. So we represented a lot of contractors. Represented McDowell. Some of the people listening to this remember the yellow signs that said, "This is McDowell property," that was all over the interstate. Interchange City down here in Smyrna or Laverne or one of them was McDowell property. We were into tax, estates. We tried to become a full-service law firm. Made the conscious decision to try to build that. And I think in the 80s, we were the fourth largest law firm in Nashville. And we were over in the Metro building where you were for a while, if you'll recall. And then we moved over to what I call the R2D building, 154th Avenue North.
Right.
Nice digs, big time, rocking and rolling, so to speak. So that was the growth. In about a 15-year period, went from about 7 or 8 guys up into the 50s, into the 80s. And it started dropping and going back and forth. And I think when I left, I think maybe it was down to maybe 48, maybe 45 lawyers, something like that.
Right, right. And you had a tremendous practice in construction bond work.
Yeah.
I remember that was a big part of the growth
Big
of
chunk
of your
towards the
firm.
end.
Couple of people that you practice with that I want to ask you about because I just do. Ed Herod, fine lawyer, known as a trial. What was Ed like to practice with?
Low-keyed country boy, came out of Gallatin. In the courtroom was tremendous, but he'd be the type of guy that, you know, you scratch his head, that type. Could raise his voice, but didn't very often.
Right.
Smart. You know, if he asked you to research something, that pretty well told you that you weren't going to find anything. Otherwise, he would have known it. Overworked. Tried a ton of cases. I'd help him, and I'd be scrambling around trying to find his insured. And maybe he hadn't seen him or talked to him in 2 years or something. His wife died. He started dating my mother, and he married her. And I thought to myself, well, why in the hell didn't you do that when I was trying to make partner? But he was a good guy.
Another powerful lawyer there was Louis Hollaball. What was Louis like to practice?
Louis was the teacher in that firm. Louis would take the young lawyers, would take us to trials, sit with us, patience, good lawyer. Famous story on Louis, he went with me on one of my second or third trials in general sessions. I asked the guy on the stand, how many beers did you have? The guy said, I had 3. This guy tugging on my shirt. I started, what? Hollaball says, asking what size. Oh, Christ. What size courts.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's Hollaball.
Yeah.
He's a German, hard-headed.
Steve, as I recall, about the late 90s, your firm had a sort of a change in who was running things.
Exploded.
And, yeah, kind of exploded. And after that, I believe that you started your own law firm.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that. That's kind of daunting, is it? Isn't it kind of when you've been practicing 30 years and you
Yeah.
go out and start your own office?
I like to think I was a pretty tough guy for some reason. You may not remember when they used to call me Street Fighter. It was a nickname. Yeah, you're grinning, you do. It absolutely scared me to death. I had been with Menier for 28 years. I'd been on the top for years. I'd been managing partner off and on. Whatever was good or was wrong, I could take credit either way to some extent. I made money when I was coming up the line. I was looking forward to somebody else making the money when I was on the downside. I was comfortable. You can say whatever you want to, but and then found out under the table, so to speak, that there was a bunch of hidden meetings going on behind the powers that be's back, and that really sent a message to me because I'd been in meetings like that myself. And basically what it was with that firm was, and I helped establish this, that when you hit 65, you lost all equity in the firm. Basic concept is, let's get the old guys, they should be the ones that are running the show for us new guys. Well, the next thing you know, you start getting to be one of those old guys and you say, Jesus, what the hell was I thinking? But regardless of that, that's what had happened. And the equity ownership had changed to such an extent that some of the young lawyers had different ideas of the direction of the firm should be taken, different ideas about the work habits. And I think basically what it was is that the insurance defense practice had taken a hit, wasn't bringing in the kind of money that it was. We could charge $100 an hour and the guy down the hall in the same firm's charging $300. You got spreadsheets, how do you compete? There's a lot of that. And don't be honest about it. I mean, I was standing in some people's way, or they felt like I was, from the firm doing certain things that the younger guys wanted. And so found out and went to one of my guys that I had kind of brought up and said, I understand there's some backdoor meetings going on. What's going on? And he told me, he said, I wasn't going to volunteer it, but you asked, I'm not going to lie to you. And he told me that these guys had put together a group that controlled the vote. And that was it. I mean, I myself was out, and they had a list of the people they wanted gone. And I was on that list big time. And
What did you do, Steve?
well, I guess I can't remember what after I quit crying. I'm sure I probably had a drink. I don't know. Maybe more than one. What I did was they were after the defense part of our program along with others, and so I put together my own firm. Consisting of Mark Levan, Benton Patton, and Paul Sprader. And we moved into the area that you're talking about here. We took our secretaries. Because they didn't want that insurance defense work, they said, take it. So everything we took. And we did it on a pleasant, manly, a way of doing it. the firm went from whatever it was, 45 to 48, down to the 20s. A whole bunch of people left. And Jim Duran, of course, he went with Waller, and
Right.
other lawyers went all over.
Don
the place.
Smith and,
Don Smith
and
started
the
his
young
own
man
firm.
went into construction law.
Construction, that jump, they didn't want to lose that.
Yep.
That wasn't part of their plan originally, I don't think, but Don wasn't going to work with these young guys. He couldn't work with them, who had more or less got the control of the thing. And so he pulled out and started his firm, and I started my firm, and I don't think anybody else started their own firm. I think they just went and got jobs elsewhere. But that firm has done well. I mean, the business plan they had has done well, and they've done well.
Before we wrap up, I want to cover what I consider an important part of your career, and that is that you became, after you started your own firm, you began mediation. And now that's primarily what you do.
I'm through.
What about mediation, Steve? You've been very successful in it. You've seen it change the landscape, the practice. Thoughts?
Well, it's killed the trial practice. I don't know where the young people today are getting the experience that they need, because cases are being settled without being tried. Kip Gaden told me a couple of years ago when I saw him on the street, he said, "Hey, you're trying more than I am." I don't know that that's true, but used to be you could walk in the courthouse, Garrett, as you recall, and on a Friday motion day, it was like social hour of a morning or of an afternoon when they'd have it at 1 o'clock or 9 o'clock. You can go over there today and fire a cannon down the halls, and you're not going to hit anybody. So where the young trial lawyers are coming from today, they're either public defenders or the criminal guys up here, that are trying lawsuits, and I don't know what their deal is. Mediation, I think, has been a tremendous boon to the plaintiff's bar. It's saved them a ton of expense. It's saved them a lot of money, and resulted in not many courthouse step type settlements. It's cut to the chase. It's helped the plaintiff bar tremendously in that with all the advertising that happens today, there's real competition to get people to sign them up as an injured person. But sometimes you can't sign somebody up if you tell them that the case in truth isn't worth crap. But it's worth something. But it's not worth these people thinking they're going to get to retire on, or they're going to get to that house they've always wanted. So the end result is that mediators, if they choose to do so, some don't, some just run numbers, as you know, but to tell the plaintiffs that here's your problems, juries aren't giving that kind of money, and don't forget the bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. Flip side, the insurance industry, a good mediator will tell them, you're light on this, you're just kidding yourself, that theory isn't going to work. To get movement out of them is a lot more difficult maybe than talking a plaintiff or somebody out of the clouds, but I've been able to do that on occasion as well. It has been a big boon. I don't think it's been a big boon for the insurance defense practice. I think in essence it's hurt them. Some of these mediations, Garrett, they're coming up here too early because they're trying to save money. They try to, even before they take the deposition of the plaintiff, if the plaintiff is so important, why would you try to settle a case without getting a look at the plaintiff? But the insurance companies don't want to spend that money for that attorney to take the case. So I think it's hurt the defense bar. But it has, in my opinion, from the civil side of the practice of law, absolutely cleared the trial courts. And there's just no excuse that we can't. Marsh Nichols over here is forced mediation. We can get cases tried over in Davidson County faster than you and I could ever remember getting them tried.
Exactly.
And Marsh
Exactly.
Nichols is probably the biggest reason why, because she forces these people to mediation. They bitch, moan, cuss her, whatever they want to. But she's cleaned up that docket, and that's what it's done. And when I first started 10 years ago doing this exclusively, I was seeing cases 6 years old. Now, if I saw a 6-year-old case, I'd be absolutely stunned. Now they're coming in here within 2 years or even less.
From your years of experience now in mediation, you got a 1, 2, 3 or a 1, 2 about what's important as a mediator to get a matter settled? What's your style?
I once went out to Vanderbilt, and they asked me to speak at a seminar out there, and I was supposed to teach one class on voir dire, and then I was supposed to also cross-examination G. William. You remember G. William Davis?
Sure.
And to this Vanderbilt seminar class about how to. It was one of those type seminars. After the seminar was over, the following day they had their wrap up, and then the people that put on the seminar made their presentation and summed up the 3 days. And they summed me up by saying, you can't do what that guy does. We're not saying he isn't successful, but if you try doing what he was telling you to do, it'll backfire on you. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what they said about me. It was really a compliment, believe it or not. But he said, you know, some guys could get away with that. He couldn't. Tom Carlton, after a case I tried with him once, said, what was this fairy tale where don't throw me into the briar patch, or every time the tire baby, or Cox is like a tire baby, you know, he throws stuff up there and it sticks. So how I handle mediations is probably different, and I know that it's different than the way it's taught at these mediation seminars in schools. The most important thing in a mediation is what goes in the plaintiff's pocket clear. I told somebody the other day, he'd been bitten by a dog. The owner had been standing on a porch and had sicked the dog on him, he says. And he lost some nerve feelings in his hands. He said, money, and, you know, he said, I want justice. I said, buddy, if you wanted justice, you should have gone up on that porch and beat the shit out of that guy. We're here talking about money. So I honestly hate to say that to you. Some people want to vent, but if the bottom line is money in a mediation, and we're not talking about a divorce mediation where you're talking about child custody, but if the bottom line in a personal injury lawsuit is compensation and how much, the bottom line is money clear in the plaintiff's pocket.
Got 2 more questions for you, wrapping up. First question is, have juries changed? Or did they change while you were still practicing law in the way they analyzed things, looked at things? Or did you think it was the same person later in your career as you had earlier in your career?
I don't think juries have changed. I don't think economics, until just recently, ever changed jury verdicts. Good times, bad times. You know, we've gone through some bad times. I never saw the juries be affected by that money one way or the other. 9/11 may have had some problems with the jury that I think tightened them up more. But in Middle Tennessee, Gareth, you're not going to ever convince me that good lawyers around here, the John Nolans and Underhill and those guys, when I first started, they didn't make a lot of money in the courtroom. No, I don't think juries have changed much, and I don't think the practice of law has either, to some extent.
If you're talking, Steve, after 45 years of experience in law practice to a young person who's thinking about going into law, would you recommend it?
Yes, I would, but I'd tell them that it isn't a quick path to riches. I'd tell them it's probably a pretty hard way to make a living, and I don't think that I would recommend that they become trial lawyers.
Mm-hmm. Has the context of the bar in Nashville changed a lot during your career?
Only to the extent that human nature has changed. Have you noticed it changing a great deal in your lifetime? I suspect not. I don't think. You used to hear, oh, it ain't like it used to be. And now the guys that are my age and doing something like this are saying to me, oh, it ain't like it used to be. Well, you know, it's not in the sense of the word. There's been a bunch of rule changes and stuff like that, but you know, when it comes down to the practice, the trial area, and who you can trust, and who you can't trust, and who you got to watch, and some guys easy to get along with, some guys gentlemen, some guys jerks, you know, human nature being, it hadn't changed. But they're just not paying anything for it anymore, bud. It's just, it's hard for somebody who, in the insurance defense practice, to get enough trials to be good, number one, and the industry just doesn't pay them enough to compete on a spreadsheet in a large firm against somebody that gets to charge $350, $400 an hour. So my son is a lawyer, and he's not a trial lawyer.
Steve, it has been a pleasure. It really has. Thank you for taking the time. Is there anything else that is important we've missed?
You and I could go on forever, and you know it. No, I think they're bored enough. They've had enough of me. Thank you, Gareth. I enjoyed it, buddy.
Thank you.